My name's Evan, and this happened when I was 19. I grew up in a small Midwestern town where nothing ever seemed to happen, and that was the way I liked it. Summers, there were humid, quiet, and slow. Nights felt like they went on forever, with crickets singing in the background and the occasional car passing by on the highway in the distance. At the time, I had just gotten my first real car, a beat-up 15-year-old Toyota with more rust than paint, but it ran and it meant freedom. I worked part-time at a hardware store and spent most of my evenings either driving aimlessly or hanging out with my friend group, which was more like a rotating cast of whoever was bored enough to hang out that night. This particular night, it was just me and my friend Lucas. We'd been driving around for a while, windows down, music low. It was one of those perfect summer nights, warm, still, with that faint smell of lake water in the air. Lucas suggested we go check out the old boat launch near Lake Redman. It was a spot kids in town used for late night parties, fishing, or just to drink without getting caught. I hadn't been there in years. It was down a narrow road surrounded by trees, with no streetlights and no houses, just blacktop cutting through the woods until it ended at a cracked concrete ramp that dipped into the water. We got there sometime after midnight. Nobody else was around. I pulled the car up close to the water and shut it off. For a while, we just sat on the hood, talking and skipping rocks into the lake. The moon was bright enough to see ripples all the way across to the opposite shore. It was peaceful, until it wasn't. Out of nowhere, Lucas asked me if I'd heard that thing about the lake. I asked what thing, expecting some cheesy ghost story. He said there were stories about people going missing out here, not drowning, just vanishing. No splashing, no screams. Supposedly, the police chalked them up to runaways, but everyone in town who talked about it thought something else was going on. I laughed it off. I mean, I grew up here. If people were really disappearing from the lake, I figured I would have heard about it. But Lucas swore his older cousin knew a guy who'd been fishing out here last summer and swore someone was watching him from the tree line the whole time. I told him he was full of it, but he just smirked and told me to look around for myself. And that's when I noticed it, movement in the trees. At first, I thought it was just an animal. The shoreline was ringed with tall pines and thick undergrowth, and shadows were everywhere. But the movement wasn't random, it was slow, deliberate. Almost like someone stepping from one tree to another, keeping just inside the darkness. I squinted and tried to focus, but the moonlight only hit certain patches of the forest. I couldn't see a face or even a shape, just these occasional breaks in the stillness, like something was timing its movements to avoid being caught in the open. "Tell me you see that," Lucas whispered. I nodded, and my stomach dropped. We both stood there, watching, trying not to make noise. The movement stopped for a while, and I started to think maybe we'd just psyched ourselves out. But then came the sound, a splash. Not in the water directly in front of us, but off to the side, like something big had stepped into the lake. The sound was followed by a faint, wet, dragging noise. Lucas muttered, "Nope, nope, nope," under his breath and backed toward the car. I followed, my eyes still locked on the dark shoreline. That's when we both heard it, a voice. It was low, slow, and distorted, like someone trying to talk underwater. Just a few words we couldn't make out. Then silence. Lucas dove into the passenger seat and slammed the door. I slid behind the wheel, fumbling for my keys. That's when the voice came again, closer this time, almost directly behind us. I didn't wait to hear more. I started the car, floored it, and we tore out of there, gravel and dust spraying into the trees. We didn't say a word for the first few miles. Finally, Lucas just said, "Told you." The next day, I drove by in the daylight, just to prove to myself it had all been in our heads. But when I got to the boat launch, I saw something that made my blood run cold. In the wet sand near the ramp were two sets of footprints, one ours, heading toward the water, and another set, bare feet, leading from the tree line right up to where we'd been standing. And they didn't turn back. They went straight into the lake. I was 17 the summer it happened. Back then, my curfew was basically whenever my mom decided to text me, which usually meant I could stay out until after midnight as long as I kept her updated. My friends and I took full advantage of that freedom, especially on nights when the air was thick and the stars were bright. The town I grew up in was surrounded by farmland, endless flat stretches of corn and soybeans, broken up only by a few barns, windmills, and the occasional dirt road that led nowhere. At night, those fields were pitch black, the kind of dark where you couldn't see your own shoes without a flashlight. There was one place we liked to go, A dirt road past the old grain elevator where a huge, overgrown field sat behind a sagging barbed wire fence. The whole thing looked abandoned, no crops, no signs, no lights. People said it used to belong to some guy who just vanished one winter decades ago. Nobody ever bought the land after that. It was a hot July night when my friend Chloe suggested we go there. It was me, her, and our buddy Jared, and we were bored out of our minds. We parked just off the main road, grabbed a flashlight, and climbed over the fence. The grass was up to our knees, and the air was thick with the smell of soil and something else, something faint but sharp like metal. We were maybe 50 yards in when we saw the scarecrow. It was old, slumped forward, its clothes shredded and faded. A burlap sack covered its head, stitched crudely into a face with two button eyes and a wide, crooked mouth. The thing looked like it had been through decades of storms, but it was still standing, perfectly straight on its post. Chloe laughed and went up to take a picture with it. Jared started making jokes about haunted scarecrows and farm ghosts. I stayed back. I don't know why, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. That's when I noticed something. There were no other scarecrows in the field, just this one. And yet, every time the wind shifted, the grass seemed to ripple in a pattern like something was moving through it. I told Chloe to hurry up, but she just rolled her eyes. She stood right next to the scarecrow, holding her phone up for a selfie. The flashlight beam caught on the burlap face, and for a split second, I could have sworn one of the button eyes shifted toward her. "Did you see that?" I blurted out. Jared chuckled, but his voice was tight. "Yeah, I thought it was just me." We all froze, staring at it. The air went still. Then, slowly, the scarecrow's head tilted, not from wind, but like it was looking at us. Chloe screamed and bolted. Jared was right behind her. I hesitated for half a second too long, and in that moment, I heard something, a soft, deliberate sound of fabric stretching and the faint creak of wood as the scarecrow stepped down from its post. I didn't look back. I sprinted through the grass, nearly tripping over roots and holes, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I reached the fence just as Chloe and Jared were clambering over it. As I swung my leg over, I glanced back, and there it was, standing at the edge of the field. The moonlight hit its burlap face, and I realized the buttons weren't sewn on anymore. They were gone. Two dark, empty holes stared right at me. We didn't stop running until we reached the car. Chloe was crying, Jared was swearing, and I was shaking so bad I could barely get the keys in the ignition. When I drove past the field 2 days later in the daylight, the scarecrow was back on his post, head slumped forward again like nothing had happened. But the buttons were still missing. It was late August, right before my senior year started. I'd just finished a late shift at the diner where I worked weekends. It was a Sunday night, and the roads were dead quiet, just the hum of my old Honda and the occasional flicker of a streetlight. The fastest way home was a 2-lane road that cut straight through the woods. No houses, no gas stations, no lights except my own headlights. I'd driven it 100 times before without a problem. But that night, something was different. About halfway down the stretch, I saw a shape ahead in the middle of the road. At first, I thought it was a deer. I slowed down, squinting. Then my stomach dropped. It wasn't a deer. It was a man. He was standing perfectly still, facing my car, wearing a long, dirty coat that hung down past his knees. His head was tilted at an odd angle, like his neck couldn't hold it up straight. I eased my foot on the brake, rolling to a stop about 30 feet away. The man didn't move. I reached for my phone, no signal, not even a single bar. I honked once, just to see if he'd react. Nothing. The air in my car felt heavy, like all the oxygen had been sucked out. My gut screamed at me to just reverse and turn around. But before I could shift gears, the man moved. It wasn't a normal walk. His legs bent at strange angles, each step jerky and uneven, like he was a puppet being yanked forward. I threw the car into reverse, heart hammering, and backed up as fast as I could without hitting the ditch. The man's pace didn't change, slow, deliberate, but he was getting closer. Then, without warning, he broke into a sprint. His arms flailed at his sides, coat flapping open, revealing something underneath, not clothes, but pale, mottled skin stretched too tight over his ribs. I floored it in reverse until I found a driveway to back into, then spun the wheel and tore off in the opposite direction. I didn't look in the mirrors. I didn't want to see if he was still there. By the time I made it to the main road, I was shaking so bad I could barely keep my hands on the wheel. When I finally got home, I ran inside and locked every door and window. The next morning, I told my mom. She said it was probably some drunk who'd wandered onto the road. But a week later, I overheard my coworker telling another waitress about a story her cousin had told her, how he'd been driving that same road at night and seen a man standing in the middle of it. She said her cousin turned around before he got too close. I asked if she knew what the guy looked like. She nodded. Dirty coat, head tilted, skin wrong. Subscribe Night Watch, press the bell icon, like, share, and comment.